Okay, so now very quickly we're going to talk about the timeline panel icons and what are they. So the first thing we've got here is our time code. We can command click and that changes it to frames, or we can command click and it's back to time code, right? So time code just says this is 8, we're at 8 seconds and 9 frames right now based on a 24 frame per second comp, or we're at frame 201. Personally, I like to stick with frames. It's much easier for me to really hone in on where I need to be and where things need to happen at. Next, we've got visibility. That just says turn this layer on, turn this layer off. We've got sound. If there's sound on that layer, it's going to show up here. We can turn it off and on as well. Then we have solo, which is if we have more than 2 layers here, I could solo and say this is the only layer I want to see, or this video is the only layer I want to see. We can lock layers so that we can't touch them or move them or change anything about them. We've got label colors here, which we'll talk about more in detail. We've got the source name and the layer name, which is a lot of times the same. We've got modes. We'll talk about those later. Track mats. We've got shy guy, which if I was to say I need these guys to be shy because I don't want to see them all the time in my composition, which is way more advanced, I could turn the shy guy on and you're not going to see anything. Now these layers are still here. Obviously they're still in the composition. We can't see them in the timeline and we're not going to mess with them and change anything about them. We've got things like draft quality and final quality. We've got effects. If effects are applied to layers, you're going to see things here. We've got frame blending here, which we'll talk about that. This can be turned on. It can blend frames together for slowing down footage or speeding it up. We'd also want to have it turned on here, right? So this says frame blending is on for the entire timeline, and it's only going to affect layers that have frame blending turned on here. Same goes for motion blur. If I enable motion blur up here and I say this layer has motion blur, this one doesn't, it's going to enable motion blur on this layer only, or it's going to enable it on these 2 layers. If this isn't turned on, these are on, it's not going to do much because motion blur is not ultimately turned on for the timeline. We've got things here for adjustment layers, which we'll get into later on. And we've got 3D layers, which we're not going to talk about in this particular series. We've also got duration. This is how long the layers are. And you can see that here. And we'll see, we've got a graph editor up here, which we'll talk about in another video. 3D, mini flowcharts. You can also move down here to the bottom left corner. You can click this. It's going to hide some of these details that we don't want to see, like the ins, outs, duration, stretch. Not always super important to see. We can expand or collapse the transfer controls here. And we can also expand and collapse this area here. So there you go. These are all 3 turned on. I can also right click up in here and I can say, hey, I want to hide this end column, right? It's not important for me to see the end column for whatever reason. It's also not important for me to see the out column, but it is important for me to see the parent and link column. So that's there. And it's also important for me to see the comments section here. If someone left a comment for me and they said, hey, check this out. That's how we see that. If it's not important for me to see this, I can say hide this comment section. And that's just a very generalized overview of the timeline panel icons.